you are in for a treat today. Because it's the first time in almost 30 years of marriage that we have ever done a sermon together, right, Lorie?
Thank goodness.
So this is a little fear and trepidation because we're not really sure what each other's going to say through this process. But that's part of why we're doing this series. We have thought about this and prayed about this and talked about this and planned for this. And part of it's the recognition that that for a lot of us in this room today who are married, sometimes there's challenges. And sometimes there's struggles, and some of you right now are struggling. Others of you, everything's going great, which you ought to put a smile on your face for just a moment because it won't last, but just for a moment that's good. Some of you have been in marriages and no longer married, and that may, in your mind, may be a great thing or maybe a sad thing, whatever the case. And some of you, are glad that you're single and will remain single your whole life. I mean, there's lots of different people here today. But what we're hoping to create both today and over the next few weeks is sort of just this honest look at marriage and to see what the Bible says about it, what little it has to say about it, but what it has to say about it, and also try to be open and honest about our own kind of things that we've gone through. But we were talking this week, Lorie, do you remember some of the childhood, sort of the romantic stories that you grew up with?
Well, yeah. I think everyone grew up with Cinderella and Snow White and...
What are you doing back there, Ann? I could have done something.
This is a family service.
Oh, all right.
You're
on now.
I'm on. Okay.
So Cinderella.
Yes, there was Cinderella and Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, where the handsome prince sweeps in and takes away all the problems that the poor girl is facing, and life is happily ever after.
And it's kind of one of those myths that out there, right? I mean, all of us have probably heard either one of those stories or some other story, that it's tough, and then the guy comes in and rescues, and off they go into the sunset, and they live happily ever after, right? And here's the reality. Here's the first point we want to make today. Myths die hard. And there's a reason they die hard. It's because we want to believe them. I mean, you think about some of the myths that you have clung on to, especially if you're in a married situation. There are probably myths that you have hung on to that you brought into the marriage that you hoped were true. And sometimes we hold on to them not because they are true, but we want them to be that way. We want it to be where you meet somebody, you fall in love. She fell in love with me at first sight, and I had to kind of fight her off. And I had lots more hair back then, so it was a much better situation. But it's going to be just wonderful and great, and it kind of goes on forever and ever, and there won't ever be any kind of problems. And we want to hold on to those because we want to believe those are true and not really face the realities. So, there's actually a few myths we've talked about them this week. First myth, and we're going to hit with the big one right off the start. If I marry the right person, everything will be right. Kind of the soulmate myth, right? And you can't have been around, you can't have watched any popular movies or read any popular books in the last few years and not kind of miss this myth that gets put out there, right? It kind of goes, somebody meets somebody and they have chemistry. Chemistry is what we're really talking about when we talk about soulmates. You meet somebody you have chemistry with, and you just fall in love, and it all feels good, and they make you laugh, they make you smile. She can't keep her mind off him. He can't keep his mind off her. And I see it sometimes in premarital counseling. The couple will come in, and they're kind of, all over each other, and they're kind of just taking up. My couch gets real small, they kind of hang there, and sometimes they'll have this thing like, oh, we've never had any trouble, and we're just so much in love. Our love is so real and so genuine and so authentic. I mean, if other people could just have the kind of love, we could teach seminars, we could write books on this kind of stuff. And, at some point, you get over your gag reflex, and you have to kind of get them down to reality and help them understand that if you buy into this myth, you will have trouble. You will have trouble. Because what happens when you have chemistry and then something happens to that chemistry? Either you try to figure out a way to fix the chemistry, or you start looking for somebody else who has chemistry with you that brings that kind of soulmate kind of thing. So this is really the big myth in my mind, but there's some other myths.
There's a myth out there that married people have married problems. And if I don't get married, I'm not going to have those problems. The problem with that is that people have problems and people get married. I would even say that problems get married. We may not think we have any problems, because who really cares when I'm living alone if I hang the toilet paper over or under? Who cares where I squeeze the toothpaste? Who cares if you don't talk to me before 9:30 in the morning, or you will be growled at? Those are not problems until you are facing intimacy, close quarters, one sink. So married, problems don't come because you get married. They've always been there. They just show up a little bit in close quarters. And so if you go into it thinking, I'm not going to get married because that's going to happen to me, you need to take a good close look at yourself, because you're bringing problems with you.
Another myth is this idea that the church will fix my spouse, relationship, kids, or family. That's the job of the church. I'll bring them here and then you fix them, Mike. I got some bad news for you. While the church is a great healing place, and what we hope that as people come from week to week, that they will get to know Jesus, that at some point they'll fall in love with Jesus, and that they'll decide to follow Jesus, that can be a long and sometimes messy process. And sometimes it doesn't happen, and to expect some institution to fix it kind of takes it all off. And it's a great myth, and I run into a lot. You need to fix this, Pastor. You need to straighten it out. And I'm thinking, I didn't cause this trouble. Why should I have to fix it, But it's one of those myths that are out there. But we talked this week, we ought to get a little more personal about our myths that we brought into our wonderful and glorious relationship.
I think one of the myths that I brought in was that if it's true love, the feelings are going to last forever. And you can't miss that if you read what's out there, the books that are out there, the movies. Everything that society is trying to tell you is that it's all about feelings, and you need to feel good, and you need to have that tingle when they walk in the room.
You don't have the tingle?
There are moments when there are tingles. But the reality...
I'll latch on to moments, guys, all right? Right, Dave? Just give me a moment.
The reality kicks in, and it's morning breath, and it's being tired, and it's the cares of life falling on you. The feelings don't last. You've got to dig deeper than those tingles that we felt when we first met, where, I couldn't wait till he walked in the room, and now sometimes I can't wait till he walks out of the room. That's the reality of marriage.
Do not clap for that.
It goes both ways. It works both ways.
It does. Here's one of the myths that I brought in, that our families will have no effect on us. You kind of think, hey, I don't really have to like Lorie's whole family because they irritate me a little bit, but when we get married, we're going to be different places away from them. They won't have any effect because it's just going to be, we're going to follow the Bible. The man leaves his family, the woman leaves hers, and the two become one, and we don't have any effect on us. And we've discovered over the years that family has a huge effect on our lives. Even if you try to work at boundaries, to be honest, I think if we were both honest today, we would say we probably, in moments when we're together with your father, my mother, they're the only two parents we have alive anymore, that we treat them with much more respect and honor, and even more, first thought goes to them than it goes to the other person. And that's sometimes kind of hard, and that's because of this myth that came in that says they're not going to have any effect, and now they have effect, and that causes a lot of tension because why are you treating them so much better than me? I joked recently, my one son and his girlfriend were here for a few days, and we were eating the meal, and I said, thanks a lot to my son's girlfriend. I said, you've just bumped me one place down on the totem pole. I'm down the list now. But it was sort of a sarcastic, not very nice statement, but it was a true statement that sometimes you feel like, these things have an effect. And so these are myths that affect how things go. You had another one.
Yes, I did. The last one not the last one, but the one I'm going to share is that I came into marriage thinking I am not going to make the same mistakes that my parents did. And then you open your mouth and you channel your mother. And you don't know where that came from. And some of the very things that I said I would never say or do, I find coming out of me. Reactions to situations. My parents did not have a real great marriage, and they did get a divorce when I was in my early 20s. But I don't remember ever really seeing them fight or argue. I remember my mom going into the bedroom and calling my dad back. And I am assuming that they worked their problems out not in front of us. And I also remember my mom one time telling me, be really, really careful what you say because you can't take it back. And so in my brain, I didn't see how disagreements were worked out. And you don't say something that you can't take back. So I came into marriage with not a great ability to address problems and to work things out. And that is something that I thought in my head, I'll be just great. Everything's going to work out good. But I was never really modeled on conflict resolution in my home. It happened, but it happened behind closed doors, and I didn't see it. And, I didn't think that would ever be a problem, but it was. And it's something that I had mistakes that my parents passed down to me. I just drug them right along.
Well, and I think that's a thing that we would probably encourage any of you that have younger kids. Sometimes you think it's in your kid's best interest that you don't fight in front of them. And depending on your fighting style, or your discussing style, I should say, maybe there is. But I think one of the things we forget as parents is that we're there to model for our kids. And if they never see that you have conflict and how you resolve it, they get a picture of marriage that there isn't any conflict. And then what happens when they hit it, and it just kind of sets them up. And I think that's another piece as parents we need to recognize our responsibility and role model that. Here's another one that was mine. That is, my spouse will do everything my way because it makes sense. Thank you. Somebody said amen. It makes sense. And that was a myth I brought in because my dad was a pretty strong guy. My brother's been a very strong guy in his relationship, in his marriage. And I kind of had that idea, and it was like, I've thought these things through. It makes sense. Why would she not agree with me? And obviously, we could spend a whole lot of time on that. But we're going to skip on to another element, all right? Over in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul, in the context of talking about marriage, but he's actually talking to single people and saying, if you cannot do it, don't get married. And Paul's got maybe a rationale for that, but he's saying, so this is the context. But he's talking about getting married or not married. And then he says these words, I do not have a command from the Lord. I don't have something specific here. But he says, but the Lord in his kindness has given me wisdom that can be trusted, and I will share it with you. And one of the things I've discovered is that while sometimes we make a big deal about what the Bible has to say about getting married and about those relationships, it really has a very small amount. It doesn't talk a lot about finding the right person, because back in Bible times, most of the people were found by your parents or, somebody like that. You were matched up with somebody and you made the best of it. So it doesn't really talk about finding the right person. The Bible talks more and more about being the right person. And so to kind of make it something. So we don't have a specific, thus saith the Lord this morning we're going to talk about. But I think we do have a few years of wisdom because we've been married how long?
Almost 30 years.
Almost 30 years. Like 10 days short, right?
11 days short.
Like 10 days.
Like 10 days.
Like 10 days. It's one of those estimate things.
Well, last week when we talked about it, you really came down on me when I said, so I'm being exact.
All right, so before we go any farther, I think it'd be a good time to pray. Would you pray with us, all right? Father, I'm thankful again for the blessing that has been Lorie in my life, and the things that we've learned together, the things that we've grown together, and even the things that at times have rubbed us against each other. And I pray that the things that we've learned can be of some kind of benefit to other folks, because we really don't have a thus saith from you. But I think sometimes in life, as it happens, there's wisdom that gets learned that can get passed along. And I pray especially for those today that are in just a tough place in their relationship at this moment. And then it's feeling stretched and strained, and there's just stuff. And I would pray that you would do what only you can do, and that is to transform a life and lives. And I would just pray that they can turn this over to you and focus on responding to you and being the right person for you. But now we just give you this time and ask you to work through us and speak through us. In your name, amen. Well, let's get into some of the kind of a reality check of things. And so, are you doing the first one or am I doing the first one?
I don't know. Show me the first one and I'll tell you. I think I'm doing this.
All right, you did the first one.
The reality is that the differences that first attracted you to one another have a tendency to become annoying. And it may be that
Now, I want to, as we go through this, please don't look at your spouse, elbow your spouse, shake your head real big. I mean, just kind of sit there and smile back at us, all right? We'll know that. I should have put that disclaimer before, sorry.
And we both promise that we're not going to specifically share those things that annoy us about each other.
I can't bring the list out?
No. So the things that I'll be saying are going to be more general, although they may be very apt to our relationship, but we don't want to go home fighting today. So we're going to not get quite that real. But the very things that attracted you, it may have been her spontaneity and free spirit that were so attractive, and now after 15 years, you wish she would just do what you planned to do. Or it might be the fact that he was so firm in his beliefs and you just admired that about him, and now there are no gray areas and you need a little gray area now and then. There are just those things that typically are what was different from you that attracted you to them. You know, there's this talk about being completed by the person who has traits the opposite of yours, and while there's some truth in that, those very completions can drive you crazy sometimes because it is not you. And that's a reality of marriage, that the very things that you admire about somebody can also be the things that you wish just for this afternoon you could put that aside and be the way I want you to be.
Reality check number 2. Kind of continue that. Some of your partner's habits will always be annoying. Again, no specifics. But it's important to know that, because sometimes you think if they would just stop this, it would fix it, or you kind of make suggestions, kind of make hints, and sometimes you got to recognize. But here's the flip side of it, and so will yours. Because whether you know it or not, you have some annoying habits. And if you don't believe that, don't ask your spouse, but ask your best friend, somebody who will be open and honest with you. And they will tell you, yeah, this, and yeah, that, because everybody has them. Everybody has sort of their quirks, their things that make them comfortable, the things they do to make things work, and so those are really there.
There will always be drama or drama looming. You may think things are going really good, but just wait. It's coming. It can be a little thing and it can be a big thing. You just don't know. But you have to be aware in a marriage it's going to happen, and how are you going to deal with it? If you don't know how to deal with it, you're going to run into real problems. And if you can't figure that out, you're going to run into real problems. And it can be a growing experience. It was a definite growing experience in my life of how to deal with problems and issues. They're going to be there. Nobody has smooth sailing for very long. And it may not be problems between the two of you. It may be a totally outside source that all of a sudden dumps and there's a strain in your marriage. And you've got to be able to work through that and hang in there.
We put up here that conflict isn't bad. I want you to say that with us. Conflict isn't bad. Why don't you say it again? Conflict isn't bad. That's important to know, because neither of us really enjoy conflict. We don't enjoy it, but sometimes it happens. But to get over that kind of mindset that conflict is bad, sometimes we as Christians kind of buy in, I can't have any conflict because that's a bad thing. If you ever read the life of Jesus, Jesus ran into conflict. Sometimes it's from outside, but sometimes he sort of initiates it. He kind of comes back, which tells us that conflict isn't necessarily bad. Sometimes you need conflict in order to address some things that take place. Lots of couples are surprised when a relationship becomes difficult. I don't do a lot of marriage counseling because it's not really my great strength, but I'll do a little bit short-term stuff. But so often it's about this idea that couples are surprised they're having conflict and they're looking for some help. And so I can kind of give them some suggestions on that, but typically we got to deal with the issue of the idea of conflict in the first place. That conflict isn't bad, and you shouldn't be surprised by it. You ought to have a plan for how to deal with it. That's part of, again, modeling as parents for our kids. The fourth reality is children will always change a marriage. If you're sitting out there today thinking, oh, we're thinking about having a child, and it's just going to be great, oh, won't be any big kind of change, you are so wrong. I'm not saying they'll change it in a terrible bad way. It's just, there's a change. You know, you go from just the two of you, and you got, you know, you're just getting used to that, and you got your time, and all of a sudden you have this other little body that is totally dependent on you, that can't get from here to there without you taking it from here to there, can't eat without you giving them something, can't get rid of the eating part without you helping them. And they become the biggest, the most important part of everything. I mean, children always change a marriage. Not for the bad, but it's just the reality of things. I mean, their mere presence will bring a change, usually a very big change to couples.
Differences in parenting styles can cause challenges in your marriage. And this can be from how you were raised, that this is how my parents did it. This can be what your interests are, what you think is important. It can be a real challenge in a marriage. He comes home, finds out the kids have done this, and mom didn't do anything. Oh, you let them get away with that. She comes home, finds out he's grounded them until they're 23. That's a problem.
It was actually 19, I think was the age.
Yeah. Can be a challenge. I don't know what else to say. It can be a challenge, and you got to work through it.
It was a huge challenge for us raising our boys because I come from a kind of a disciplined home where, you know, my dad said things. He was a cop, and so, you know, he'd throw you in jail if I got in bad trouble, you know. But there was just sort of this sort of expectation there that, and, you know, raising two boys, you kind of think, I want my boys to grow up to be responsible men, to take responsibility for their actions, to understand there's consequences. And we had a lot of discussions over the years about, you know, how you discipline. And it's important to recognize it'll always be a challenge because at some point those things come up. And to figure out a way to work through that conflict and come some kind of sense of what your parenting style together is going to be. Because if you keep doing it where one does one way and one does the other way, you're heading for a whole other source of stuff. So we already did that. All right. Reality number 6, you will eventually have to deal with money problems. Everybody say boo hiss. But it's a reality. You're going to have to deal with it at some point. Sometimes it's how you view money. Lorie and I view money, used to view it, we're much closer today, but when we first got married, we viewed it 180 degrees opposite. If it was more opposite, we were there. I mean, I viewed money as security. I viewed money knowing I had money made me feel good because I'd worked hard for it and I want to know I got something.
I like spending money. You make it to spend it.
And I'll tell you, I was a terrible husband when we first got married because we were on a tight budget. We were, you know, the beans and rice for the last week or so of any month. And so I'd have in my mind, this is how much money we set aside for groceries, for gas, for this. And all of a sudden we're out of money, and I'd be like, what happened to the money? Right, guys? Don't say anything. I'm just setting you up. But I'd be like, and so I'd say, show me where you spent the money. Give me the receipts. I'd want her to count down to the penny. Terrible idea, guys. But it was coming from my issue of how I see money, how I've handled money. Want anything else on that? All right, let's go to number 7. Well, it's one of the top 3 things couples fight about.
You'll always have a tendency to lead separate lives. We don't share the same interests. We
share some.
Well, some. Yeah, some. But, you know, we have different ways of...
Yeah, we share some.
Yeah, we do. We
Don't
have
pull me off in
different
front of these
ways of relaxing.
Yes,
We have different types of movies or TV shows that we like to watch. We have very different ways of dealing with pleasures and life challenges, and it's very easy to let him go do his thing and I'll find a spot in the house to go do my thing, and we'll be ships that pass in the night. So, we've had
If we're lucky.
If we're lucky. And sometimes, and so we've just had to make an effort to find middle ground. Okay, what are some things that we both like to watch on TV? So let's set aside, I'm not a TV watcher. I really don't like to watch it, but I'm one of the types of people who can walk by and glance at it, and I'm hooked like that, and then I can't leave until that show is over. So Mike has kind of learned if I'm coming through, he pauses it, because he knows I'm trying to go to bed, and if he doesn't pause it. But we have learned to pick a night that then we watch the shows, thank you for the TiVo and all of that stuff. We'll watch one night, we'll sit down together and spend some quality time watching our favorite shows. But it's a way of joining him in his relaxation, because that's his relaxation. It's making an intentional effort to carve time out together because we're busy and we're stressed, and you immediately go to your safe place and your place that's going to fill your needs. And it's really easy to forget that this is a partnership. We need to find ways to be together. And so it's going out to eat. We have one night a week that we typically go out. We just know that's when we go. It's not a great big old date night. It's just a chance to go out and be together.
It doesn't count as a date night?
It doesn't count as a date night.
Man.
Date night is not routine. Date night is special. So keep that in mind.
Don't clap for her, I keep telling you. Please encourage this sort of thing. But I'm trying to figure this thing out. All right, hey, let's get to... Here's the most important point we're going to make on this section. The key is to see problems as normal. We need to believe that problems are normal. We've been sold this myth out there that problems are abnormal, that if you're in love and you find your soulmate and all that, everything will just go smoothly. You won't act like your parents. You won't do that. Problems are normal because problems happen in life, right? And so to expect that there are going to be problems in your marriage because your marriage hopefully is a normal marriage. If it's abnormal, that you go see somebody else about that kind of stuff, right? But problems are normal. Here are some definitions. I think they're on your outline there. First of all, the definition of commitment. Commitment means being willing to be unhappy for a while until you can work things out. Your goal is that you'll work things out, but sometimes you've got to be unhappy through that process, but you want to stay committed as you work through it.
The goal of marriage is not to stay married. That will hopefully be an outcome, but that shouldn't necessarily be your goal, that by gum, we're going to do what, we're in this and we're never going to let go. That's really not the goal. The goal is to grow as a couple while growing individually. You don't give up your identity. I don't have to become a clone of Mike. He might like that.
No.
No. Anyway, you want to grow.
Stuff to live with.
You want to grow separately, and you need your own space. That you need to be yourself and to find outlets that are of your interest. But you've got to grow together as a couple, because as you grow together and change together and learn together, that's what builds you as a couple. And you want to stay together. It's not a matter of we are going to stay together. It's we get to stay together. This is what we want, is to be together as a couple.
Yes, ma'am. Let me ask you this. We've been married 30 years here in about 11 days. I learned. Out of those 30 years, how many would you say have been good years?
I'd say probably about 23, 22, 23. I think we had 5 to 7 years that
I was about
struggled.
18 years, so I'm a little less, but I had a little more reference. All right. And I asked her that question. We didn't plan that, but I just asked her that question because I want you to know that some years aren't great. I mean, and we're not talking about the whole year, but if you balance it out, the course of this year has been just a really tough year. And it's important to know that part of that is commitment, not just we're going to stay married, but also to get through this in order to accomplish what we want to accomplish, which is hopefully to stay together until one of us dies or Jesus returns.
Or both of us die. We could die together, who knows?
Oh, yeah, I guess we could. I hadn't thought about it. All right, hey, let's look at this text. Ephesians chapter 5. Paul is talking, this is the one place where the Bible does talk specifically about marriage. And he starts off with a very interesting statement. He says, listen, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One is he's asking for this idea of mutual submission. He's talking to both a husband and a wife. And Paul's not introducing the idea of submission, but he's redefining submission. See, back in the days when Paul wrote this, wives understood what it was like to be submissive to their husbands, right? So yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we got to paint the picture for him here. But, wives were even almost like property back then, didn't have a lot of rights, and so there was no question about they were submissive. But Paul is kind of trying to redefine what that submissiveness looks like. It isn't sort of the man and his woman who happens to be around and will do everything he says, but he starts off by saying, listen, you need to submit to one another, not just because of that's the right thing to do, our culture doesn't say that, but out of reverence for Jesus. That as Jesus works in your life, out of reverence for what he's doing in your life and has done in your life, you want to submit to one another. Then he goes on and says this.
For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. He is the Savior of his body, the church. And to me, what this means is that his needs, Mike's needs, and Mike's growth, and Mike's well-being is as important as mine. And I'm not going to say it's more important because I don't know that, I'm not certain that it's more important, but it is as important. And as a selfish being, as somebody who wants things my way and my comfort and my needs, I have to be reminded that Mike has needs and wants and comforts that are just as important as mine. And I need to give him that right, give him that respect that he deserves under God's plan.
Amen. Thank you. Yes. You could have cheered for that. They cheer for that part. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you cheer for the other part, cheer for that part. All right. Hey, he goes on. He says, listen, for husbands, this means love your wives just as Christ loved the church. And then he describes what that looks like. He says he gave up his life for her. And so this mutual submission thing is, it's a two-way street, I think is what Paul's talking about here. And it's about how you see the other person and what you're willing to do for the other person, how far you're supposed to go. And he's saying, I'm supposed to love Lorie just like Jesus loved me and loved his church, which is he gave up his life, I ought to be willing to lay down my life for her, to take the bullet, to step in front, to do those kinds of things. Then he goes on and says, listen, a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. That there's this mutual thing. It's not because, remember the Bible talks about this. It says, as the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united in one. And he says, so if you're one, you know what, really how you treat her really is how you're treating yourself through this process. And then he has this interesting statement. He says, this is a great mystery. And if you're married, you would say, yes, that's true. This is a great mystery. You got different ways of looking at things. I mean, you got the sort of classic, there's this book we read years ago, Women Are Like Spaghetti, Men Are Like Waffles. Great book, by the way. Guys, we like one thing at a time. We'll work. Women, everything's connected. You got that. You got the personality. You got everything else out there. Everything's mixed up. This is really a great mystery. But he also says, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. So I'm really talking about how Jesus and the church go together, but I am talking about how husbands and wife do all this stuff. So again, I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. This mutual submission, mutual respect, that's the goal of all this, that we would treat each other with those kinds of things. But the reality is, it doesn't always happen. In fact, it normally doesn't happen. It's never an equal, I'm giving 100% to her and she's giving 100% to me. Those ships may cross momentarily, maybe some docking there for a few moments, but otherwise, one ship is going fast and the other's going slow. It's the recognition that this isn't always the way it works out, but it is the way that can make it work out that'll be a blessing to us. I read this somewhere and I just wrote it up here because I want to be able to read it to you. The reason that marriage is so painful yet wonderful is because it is a reflection of the gospel, which is painful and wonderful at the same time. That's what God really hopes in any kind of relationship, whether it's a marriage relationship or not, that it sort of encapsulates, there's painful parts of it, there's wonderful parts, and it's really this great picture of the gospel. And here's what the gospel is. We are more sinful and flawed than we ever dared believe. Yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus than they ever dared hope. And that's hopefully the kind of relationship we can have as a husband and wife, is that I know I mess up, that I'm selfish, that I'm self-centered. Don't shake your head, just listen there. But I'm all those things. And I can try to convince myself that she's it, but if I take the responsibility, it's hopefully finding somebody who accepts you for all those faults and loves you beyond your wildest dreams and hopes. And the hard times of marriage can drive us to experience more of the transforming love of God. That there is even a benefit in that it can remind us again of our great need of God to do the transforming. And a good marriage is also a place where we can experience more of this kind of transforming love on our level. And that's really what we're hoping to create over this month of September in these sermons. And also there's going to be some small groups starting. There'll be an open house, not this week, but the next couple of weeks. Have a chance to go up and hear about it. We're trying to do everything possible to give you some resources, to give you some experiences, to strengthen either a marriage that's already good or to help a marriage that's maybe struggling a little bit. Because we recognize that relationships, husband to spouse, parent to child, friend to friend, any kind of connection, when those things work good, when we've figured it out, when we understand conflict happens, when we understand how we have a plan to do it, when we can get that together, it becomes a wonderful kind of experience. But when that isn't happening, it can be one of the worst experiences. And so our goal, again, is just for you to recognize that we're all in this together. The couple that's been up here today will be here next week, and they are not perfect. I already know Ann and Jose aren't perfect. I hear stories. Jose, you ought to hear the stuff that happens. Dave and Eileen, when they share, they're going to share something. We want to be open and honest that we don't have perfect marriages. Because I don't think there can be perfect marriages. Because marriages are made up of two imperfect people. But that doesn't mean they can't be good. And that doesn't mean they can't be great. It just means you got to be honest and open about what they are. And that is two people who don't always have it all together. They can be very selfish and self-centered. At times can step beyond that and love someone else.
Amen.
Amen. All right, thanks, folks.